Welcome to the Narrative Mindset Podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, I would appreciate it if you went back and viewed previous episodes when you get time. The clock on the wall of the Mercury Grill read 1:17 a.m. Its metallic hands sweeping with a weight that seemed to measure more than minutes. Outside, the rain slicked. Streets of Cass Avenue whispered with the echoes of ambition and failure. I sat nursing cold coffee, pushing around ideas on a napkin, trying to excavate some spark of genius from the exhaustion of routine. Detroit, quiet and relentless, had a way of reminding you that every decision carried a cost, and every dream demanded a reckoning. The clock on the wall read 1:17 a.m. It wasn't a digital clock. It was a relic. Its metallic hands sweeping with an audible, heavy clack that seemed to measure not just minutes, but the cumulative weight of decisions. I was nursing a third cup of coffee, cold and bitter, pushing around ideas on a napkin, a futile exercise in trying to excavate genius from exhaustion. Outside, the steady, cold rain of an early Michigan spring slicked the asphalt of Cass Avenue. Detroit was quiet, wrapped in damp hush that follows the midnight rush. Yet beneath the silence, you could always sense the deep rumble of history, of fortunes made and promises broken. This city was built on ambition, and sometimes, late at night, it felt like an echoing mausoleum for the ones that didn't make it. I was 42, which officially meant I was past the age of promising newcomer and firmly into established grinder. I still carried the dream, the big one, the definitive piece of work that would justify the long nights and the sacrifices. But lately, the weight of chasing it felt less like momentum and more like gravity. I was starting to fear not failure itself, but the slow, corrosive numbness that precedes surrender. Arthur was sitting 3 booths down. He was always there, usually bent over a stack of papers or simply staring into the middle distance, his silvery hair neatly combed, his hands big and rugged, a worker's hands that somehow looked too clean for the factory floor. He was maybe 70, perhaps older. I knew his name because he was a fixture, a ghost in the machine of the early morning diner crew. He caught me watching him, not with annoyance, but with the slow, deliberate awareness of a man who has nothing to hide and nowhere to rush. "Couldn't sleep, kid?" Arthur asked, his voice low, a gravely baritone that sounded like it had been filed down by decades of use. "Something like that, Arthur," I replied, shoving my notebook aside, just fighting the current. He slid out of his booth and, holding a chipped ceramic mug, walked over and sat across from me. He didn't ask permission. The act was one of tacit understanding. We were both on the wrong side of the morning, bonded by insomnia and the fluorescent glow. Fighting the current, he replied, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. That's a good way to put it. You still doing that writing thing? Scripts, right? Trying to, I admitted. It feels like pushing a boulder uphill sometimes, especially lately. The older you get, the heavier the boulder seems. Arthur took a slow drink of his coffee, his eyes tracking the steam. The weight isn't the boulder, son. The weight is the clock. When you're young, time is an infinite bank account. You can fail 100 times, and it doesn't matter, because the sun will rise, and you have another 20 years to figure it out. When you hit 40, the account balance is still substantial, but you start seeing the interest payments. Every decision costs more. This landed like a punch to the gut. It was the precise cold calculation of time I had been trying to ignore. You speak from experience. I ventured, though it wasn't a question. He nodded, pushing his empty cup away. Oh, yes, I had dreams too. Not scripts. Mine were louder. One was music. I wanted to be a composer. Orchestral pieces. Not Motown, but big, serious, complicated stuff. The other was invention. Pure mechanics. I had sketchbooks full of designs for things that didn't exist yet. A new kind of turbine, a self-adjusting transmission. I looked at his hands again. They didn't look like they had ever touched a valve or a violin string. They looked like they spent 40 years filling out ledger sheets. What happened? Arthur leaned back, the vinyl creaking. He didn't rush the answer. He never rushed anything. Life happened, which is a cliche, right? But the truth of it is pretty less dramatic than that. There was no single moment of crisis, no great tragedy. It was a slow, deliberate series of small choices, each one sensible, each one weighted toward stability. He fixed his gaze on the sugar dispenser, as if reading his confession off its highly polished steel. I had a wife, soon a kid. I was 27. I needed health insurance. The orchestra gig was drying up, and frankly, my compositions were good, but they weren't undeniable. They were promising. Promising doesn't pay formula. He paused. I got a job in purchasing for one of the auto suppliers downriver. Good job, benefits, pension. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I set aside 2 hours every morning for compositions, 2 hours on Sunday for designs. I felt the familiar twist in my stomach, the recognition of a path I, too, was dangerously close to walking. I had my own equivalent of the purchasing job, the safe, lucrative gigs that paid the rent but starved the soul. And did you find the time? Arthur gave a sharp, dry laugh that held no humor. In the beginning, sure. For months, maybe. But the job was demanding. The kid was teething. The house needed siding. You come home, and after 8 hours of necessary compromise, Your mind isn't sharp enough to construct a symphony. It's only sharp enough to scan the headlines and wait for dinner. So you gave up? I murmured. No, he corrected, emphatically. You don't give up a dream, son. Not like you drop a bad habit. You smother it with blankets of practicality. You feed its jurisdiction until it quiets down. You don't lose it all at once. You chip away at it. You tell yourself, I'll start again when the mortgage is paid. I'll start again when the kids are through college. I'll start again when I retire. He looked straight at me then, his eyes clear and tired. And then you retire. And the materials are still there, the piano, the drafting board. But the hand is gone. The restlessness is gone. The ambition has been replaced by a kind of quiet, functional contentment. That's the real tragedy. Not the failure to achieve, but the failure to remain hungry. I felt a cold dread settle over my chest. This was the quiet war. I feared losing. The battle, not against the world, but against comfort. Did you regret it? I asked, the words barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. Arthur didn't jump to say yes or no. He pondered the question with the weight it deserved. I regret the quietness. That's what I miss. The noise of a potential life. The feeling that something big was still possible. I have a great life, good kids, stability. But when I walk through this city, when I see those old grand buildings downtown, half empty, still beautiful, still hinting at the Detroit that was supposed to be, I feel a kinship with them. We are both structures that fulfill a purpose, but ultimately surrender the grand design for the necessary scaffolding. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper. Not a sketchbook, but a blueprint. It was a technical drawing, precise and dense with notations. I keep this, he said, smoothing the paper onto the table. It was a schematic for a continuous feed automation loom. It was elegant. I sold the patent rights for enough money to pay off the last of the house payments. It was financially brilliant, artistically null. He tapped the paper. They simplified my design, made it cheaper, less efficient, but reliable. That's what they do to dreams, you know? The world takes your elegant, complicated vision and simplifies it until it fits into the budget. And mostly, you let them, because the budget is real and the vision is just vapor. Silence fell heavy between us, punctuated only by the sizzle of the coffee pots. Outside, the neon sign of the diner cast a hazy pink glow on the wet street. I looked at my own notebook, covered in frantic, ill-formed notes for a character arc that wasn't working. How many times had I started to simplify my own vision, shaving off the complexity, telling myself the audience wouldn't notice, just to hit a deadline or satisfy a studio note. So What do you do with that regret? I finally asked. How do you live with the ghost of the self you could have been? Leaning over your shoulder, Arthur sighed, a deep rattling sound. You make peace. You realize that the self you become was necessary to shelter the people you love. That's the adult compromise. And here he leaned forward, his voice dropped conspiratorially. You make sure you tell someone else about the ghost. He tapped my notebook gently. You still feel the hunger, that fear you mentioned, the fear of becoming numb. Hold on to that. That fear is the dream's last desperate pulse. But is it too late? I pressed the question, hanging in the air. A plea, not just for me, but for him. Arthur didn't give me a cliche answer about the wisdom of age or the fresh start. He gave me the truth of elapsed time. It's too late for the version of a dream I had when I was 25. That boy had fire and arrogance and endless nights. That man is gone. But it's not too late to re-engineer the dream, he said. The fuel changes when you're young. You run on ego and fame. When you're 40, you run on legacy and necessity. The work you do now, if you keep fighting the current, will come with a depth and a complexity that 25-year-old me could have touched. But you know what everything costs. He folded the blueprint and tucked it away. The war between hope and surrender is fought every morning, not just once. And the way you win isn't by becoming successful, but by refusing the comfort of numbness. Arthur rose slowly, gathering his coat. I'm going home. My grandkids are coming over this afternoon. They want me to help them build a birdhouse. Simple mechanics. He winked. Maybe I'll design a new kind of feeder. He didn't say goodbye. Just walked toward the front door, fading into the pink neon haze. I stayed slumped in the booth for another hour. The bitter coffee, now fully cold. Arthur's words had stripped away the excuses I had been cultivating. The tired narrative that the world was too hard, that my window had closed. He had stared into the heart of deferred ambition and reported back. Dreams don't die. They simply change jurisdiction. They move from the public square of achievement to the private chamber of purpose. The city outside began to lighten. The humid gray of dawn seeping over the vacant lots and the hulking silhouettes of abandoned factories. Detroit, the ultimate example of a dream deferred. A city that had faced surrender and yet stubbornly insisted on survival. It was still breathing, still fighting to re-engineer its purpose. I picked up my pen. The weight was still there, the clock still ticking. But now the fear of numbness felt sharper, more focused. I wasn't just chasing a script anymore. I was chasing the obligation to the man I still had time to become. I didn't erase the useless notes. Instead, I started a new page, leaving the previous failures right there on the table. Witnesses to the promise. Arthur had given me a harsh gift, permission to be tired, but a mandate to keep fighting the quiet war. It wasn't too late, Arthur had implied, providing you knew the difference between quiet grief and genuine surrender. And the difference, I realized, was simply whether you still kept the blueprint in your pocket or if you had thrown it away entirely. The sun finally broke through the clouds, splashing a weak, defiant wedge of light across the damp street. I finished my coffee, the cold bitterness now tasting strangely like determination. It was time to get back to the current. He never spoke of dreams he had set aside, not in bitterness, not in regret. They lived quietly in the margins of his life, folded into the choices that built a home, raised children, and kept food on the table. What he lost in ambition, he gained in presence. The steady hand at the wheel, the voice that steadied others when storms came. The world might never know the symphonies he imagined or the inventions he sketched, but his family knew the man who carried them through. And that was its own kind of masterpiece. And in the end, when the house was quiet and the years had thinned into memory, he understood that maturity had not killed his dreams. It had transformed them. They had become the laughter of his children, the resilience of his partner, the foundation of a life that endured. His legacy was not the brilliance of a single creation, but the quiet architecture of love and responsibility. It was not the dream he once chased, but it was the life he had built, and it was enough.